with flights all but grounded all throughout North America, and especially with deliveries that are on the rise between shoppers all across North America, a lot of people are looking for contactless delivery. And one of the questions in many people's minds is, can drones be that solution? That's exactly why we have Michael Zahra, you're the CEO of Drone Delivery Canada, on here to answer that, answer a few questions I have for myself, but also what I love to see is that a lot of our investors have spoken up and they've got some questions for him as well. So Michael, welcome.
Thanks very much for having me.
Absolutely. And, it's a crazy time with COVID and how many industries it's changing. And why don't we start with that very first one there? When it comes to contactless delivery, you can imagine that drones could very well be a solution to that. Is that what you're banking on?
Absolutely. I mean, so before COVID was happening, we really saw at a high level two broad use cases for drone logistics. One was remote communities, whether they were indigenous or not. And the other was where time is of the essence. So maybe you can get there, but if I can get there faster with a drone, it makes all the difference. So medical applications or industrial customers where time is of the essence or time is money. But with COVID-19, we're seeing two more use cases arising. And one is limiting person-to-person contact. So an example would be there are many First Nations communities in Canada. This is also an issue in the US we're seeing with some of the Navajo communities. They're starting to self-isolate because they're particularly susceptible to these kind of pandemics because they often have greater underlying healthcare issues, but they need to keep the supply chain open. So the only way to do that is with drone logistics. So we're getting a lot of interest from First Nations communities, healthcare broadly defined as hospitals and medical labs and pharmaceuticals and pharmacy, as well as the Canadian federal and provincial government to help both these communities by limiting person-to-person contact, but keeping the supply chain open. So it's definitely increased the profile of the industry and the company and brought on some new use cases. The fourth use case we see is very interesting, and we think there'll be some longevity after the pandemic, is that companies are now looking at their business continuity and disaster recovery plans and saying, I don't have a backup to my supply chain. Gee whiz, I wish I had a drone logistics solution in place already. Like you may have a diesel generator that gives you electricity in case of a power outage and a natural disaster and that sort of thing. So that's a fourth use case that's come out as a result of coronavirus.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get to another, I jumped the gun there because that's the question that was just burning on my mind, because you can imagine that's what's on a lot of companies' minds, just like you said. But really quickly as well, I think many people would have deduced this already, but when it comes to Drone Delivery Canada, can you give a brief overview of your company, just for anybody who maybe this is their first time ever hearing about your company?
Sure. So we are not a drone company, despite what the name is. We are actually offering a drone logistics solution as a managed service. So we don't just sell somebody a drone and away they go. We sell a turnkey solution, which means there are certainly components to the system, including drones, and I can talk about the details of the drones if you're interested. But there's automated battery management systems, there's automated depots that the drones fly between. So we sell this as a complete solution that then somebody can use for their own internal use to move parts, tools, documents, supplies around, or they can then use it as a service to somebody else as a courier would. So it's really a turnkey solution that we offer, not just selling somebody some hardware.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that, because I've looked into your company before. I am an investor, and I've spoken with many investors in our community. So I did know that there was a difference there, but I just want to make sure for all of those who are watching for the first time, knowing that it's not just the drones, there's a lot to go with that.
Right.
Now, before we start getting to some of these investor questions, I'd like to go back to COVID-19 really quickly, because we touched on that very quickly on a certain element. But when it comes to the pandemic and everything that's happened, would you categorize this as a deterrent, as in, maybe government regulations have slowed down or it's harder to do things? Or is this an opportunity for your company? And like you were saying earlier, a lot of companies are saying, we need a backup solution just in case, but maybe this now turns into my actual solution for all of my deliveries.
Right. I mean, certainly the pandemic is a horrible thing. We all wish it didn't happen, but it has definitely raised the profile of the industry, brought on some new use cases, and raised the profile of our company. So I think, if I understand your question, we're going to see some shift in perception of how people could use drones. There are people who are aware of it, but never really considered it as happening today. They thought it's, George Jetson, it's going to happen in the future, that sort of thing. But, we're operating today, we're commercially operating, generating revenue, we're live. So people are starting to see, hey, this is real. This is something that's real. It's not just sci-fi for the future. This is something that I could have. This is something that, gee whiz, I wish I already had. So people are definitely looking at drone logistics as a core part of their supply chain. Whether it's going to replace traditional, trucks, planes, trains, these sort of things, I don't think so. Not in the short term anyway. It's certainly going to augment or potentially be a backup to those systems in case of events like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the answer there. And as I had said at the beginning of this interview as well, what I love to see is when we turn to our community of investors and they come up with a lot of questions. And there's some really great ones in here. So I'm actually going to read them exactly as they came in, because some of them touch on some really interesting spots of your company. I think they'll be very interesting. And I know that investors would love to hear the answers for that.
Sure.
So the very first one here is, has your company had any talks with mail or delivery companies such as Canada Post, FedEx, or UPS?
All of the above. We have had conversations in Canada and the United States with all of the big courier players. You mentioned some names, and there's a few others, as well as all the postal companies in Canada and the United States. So definitely they see the application for reducing costs for last mile or first mile, or even with the larger drone like the Condor, which I can get into later, the middle mile. So they see applications across the whole supply chain, and there are instances, especially with Canada Post or US Post, where there are communities that, because they're government, they're mandated to go to, but they are losing money on those deliveries because of the nature of them being remote or on islands or coastal or whatever. So they see tremendous cost saving opportunities. So the couriers see cost saving opportunities, but they also see incremental revenue opportunities and maybe some premium services that they could offer because of the timeliness of drones and being able to bypass traffic and that sort of thing. So absolutely, we've talked to those markets for sure.
Very interesting. And I can imagine them being able to use these types of things. Even right now with mail across Canada, it takes weeks and weeks just to get. So there's definitely logistical issues at the moment, and it'll be very interesting where they find the solutions for that.
Sure.
The next question here from one of our investors is obviously something very important is IP, the intellectual property. Does your IP protect you from Google or Amazon Air?
So the IP is ours. It's all owned by us. We have 2 patents, one on our overall system that we received July of last year, another one we received about a month ago, and that covers I'll call it the depot-to-depot philosophy of how we deliver from our drone spot depots to our drone spot depots, and there's about 6 more patents to come. So certainly the patents protect our intellectual property, but not to criticize my competitors, but why not? One of the big differences between us and the named companies is we're more than a drone company. We're looking at a solution, and our methodology is a very robust, disciplined, safe, secure environment for moving cargo. Because some of the cargo that people are talking to us about moving is very high value, very high risk, pharmaceuticals, monetary instruments, et cetera, et cetera. So, you see some of our competitors with a small drone, little string, cardboard box. That's not going to cut it those are great for coffee and muffin and YouTube videos and those sort of things, but it's not going to cut it for the kind of deliveries that we're doing. So certainly the patents protect us, but the nature of our system being very different than anybody else's protects us just because customers are looking for a more safe, secure environment. So very, very different philosophy and how we go to market and the technology.
And well said. I appreciate that. Now, you mentioned depot to depot. That's actually one of the questions. So it's going to be a 2-part. So I'm going to add a little bit to that. If you don't mind quickly explaining what you mean by depot to depot. And then the question for the investor is, has your depot to depot model been welcomed by international clients and or governments?
So I'll do it in reverse order. So yes, international clients and Canadian clients like the depot to depot model. The fact that it's a safe, secure depot. So just to describe what the depot to depot model is, and that's our preferred model, and we can deviate it from it, which I'll talk about. It's basically a drone spot, which is an enclosure with access control, with security cameras, with a weather station, with a weigh scale, with a customer service hotline in case there's any kind of issues. So it's really a very safe, secure, fixed route from a drone spot to a drone spot. Now, it's not point to point necessarily. It could be one point of origin and 10 points of destination. So really the network is what the customer defines, but we fly from a drone spot depot to a drone spot depot. So that's a little different than the way others are. We can relax from that depot to depot model if necessary. So in the case of emergency response, humanitarian aid, or residential deliveries, where they're not going to have a drone spot or a depot or any kind of infrastructure at the destination, we can fly to a destination, we can hover to a lower altitude, we can drop cargo and then fly back. So we can do that model. It's definitely not our preferred model because, again, the kind of cargo that we're going to be moving is much different than coffee and donuts. It's more, I would say, high value, high risk cargo, and people really want something that's got access control, security, accountability, a proof of delivery, and a whole record keeping system that goes with it.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to have accountability for that. And we do have a couple more investor questions, but that's a perfect time to speak a little bit more about the drones themselves, because clearly if you're doing small packages from a depot to a house within, like, say, 2 kilometers, 3 or 4 kilometers, that's much different than the need of a much bigger package that could be a much longer distance. Can you go over the difference between some of your drones? Maybe how far can they go, how much weight they can pull, so that people can have an understanding of how capable these things are?
Yeah, so our focus is, again, very different than some of the competitors you mentioned. They're focused on very small packages, 5 pounds, these sort of things, and that suits their model, and that's great. We're focused more on, I would say, medium to heavy cargo and medium to long range. So we've got 3 drones, 3 different models of drones in our portfolio today, and that's always expanding. But the Sparrow is the smallest one. It's electric. It goes about 30 kilometers, and it will take about 4.5 kilograms of payload, which is about 10 pounds. The next one up is the Robin. It will go 60 kilometers and take about 11.3 kilograms of payload, which is about 25 pounds. And then there's a jump to the Condor, because it gets to a point where you're carrying so much battery that all of your cargo and all of your weight is really battery. So we jump to gasoline powered. So the Condor literally looks like a small helicopter. And it is gasoline powered. It's a very simple 2-stroke automotive gasoline, very low maintenance, very reliable, very simple, very cost effective to run. But it now has a capacity of 200 kilometers and 180 kilograms of payload, which is 400 pounds, going at 120 kilometers an hour. So they're very different. The big one, the Condor, doesn't replace the smaller ones. The analogy I always have is, one's a Ferrari and one's a pickup truck. Very different applications, but they both have their uses. So the Condor is more, again, long range, heavy industrial goods or smaller goods in bulk, as an example.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because now people can understand the various different drones that you're using. It also helps them to understand the different sectors and different areas and products that you could be moving as well. Very different, it sounds like, from one unit to the other.
Right, exactly.
Now, another question that came in from one of our investors, and this is more of on a fundamental side of things, is everyone's always looking for positive cash flow and being able to have positive income as well. So this specific question says, do you have enough cash flow to get to positive revenue?
So we are already generating revenue. So the answer would be yes. We have sufficient cash to easily get us to the end of the year. That's not a problem. I think one of the mistakes that people make is they look at our cash burn quarterly historically, and then they extrapolate that's what's our cash burn going to be in the future, and that's not the case. And the reason is our cash burn was a little higher in the past because we had some foundational R&D to do, which is now done. So R&D is going to be going down, and there's always going to be some enhancements to the system, so that's going to be lesser going forward. Plus, we also had some non-recurring expenses building out the new facility and some equipment and these sort of things. So our cash burn going forward is less. We do have cash flow more than enough to the end of the year. And we are now, as of March of this year, so recently, now generating our first implementations and our first revenue. So we feel very comfortable with our funding and where we are financially.
Very good to hear, especially for a lot of investors who've been with your story for some time.
Right.
Seeing that research and development, seeing it being put into place, and seeing revenues coming from it. It's always what you're aiming to do. It sounds like that's exactly what you're able to do.
Right.
Now, for investors who are hearing this story either for the first time or currently investing, or currently your investors, or maybe they've heard about you for a while, but hearing this, like, wait a second, they're generating revenue. Okay, I'll give them another look. What would you say to an investor for them? What are the different elements that you are excited about for the remainder of 2020 that an investor can really see as the opportunity and the reason for either holding or buying into your company?
Well, I mean, obviously they should do their own due diligence, and there's a lot of information online. You can go to our website, dronedeliverycanada.com, and see the videos and interviews like this, and really understand what the company is doing. But like we just said, there are certain milestones in the life of a company. When you're a startup, it's a concept. You develop the technology. In our case, we get the regulatory approval, and then you start, launching deals and commercialize and go operational and generate revenue. So I would say, people should realize where we are in our life cycle. We're now generating revenue, which I think is a major, major milestone for any startup. So I think that's very important to know that we've gone from a pre-revenue startup to fully commercialized, fully operational, generating revenue in the last 12 or so months. So number one, big takeaway. And number two, this is still a little bit of a nascent industry. We're building the company, but we're also building the industry, given that we're a clear leader in the industry. But this is an industry, no pun intended, that's about to take off. So this is not something that, I'm not sure people are going to use drones in the future. Maybe this is a fad. Maybe it's going to go away. I mean, this is a proven model. We've proven the technology. We've proven the business model. So this is an industry that you can get in at the very beginning, just like some other industries, and people have done well in those regards. So if you want to be involved at the very beginning of what's going to be a very disruptive and exponentially growing industry, now would be the time. So definitely take a look.
And very well said. This is I'm a firm believer this is not a fad. It's more of a mention or a case of how fast will it take to be adopted by the rest of the industry? How large will it get? What different industries will have more exposure into earlier rather than later? Because drones, electric vehicles, all these different things are a revolution that you can't stop. It's just a matter of
Right.
time.
Right.
Now, you already half answered this question, but I'd like to do it a little bit more in detail just for somebody who's asking themselves this. If they're hearing this and they're looking for more information, where can they turn to for that information?
So you can go to dronedeliverycanada.com. On the website, there's information about the drones, there's information about the vertical markets that we address. There's all kinds of videos. So you can see all that information there. Press releases are all there as well. You can read about our patents and the projects that we've done. We're also all over social media. So you can search for Drone Delivery Canada on LinkedIn. We've got a YouTube channel, which has some great videos, so you can see what it really looks like. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. So lots of information out there for anybody who wants to see what we're up to and actually see real pictures and real videos. So,
absolutely. Well, Michael, I appreciate very much for you taking this time to answer some of my questions, but most importantly, something I'm very personally passionate about, answering the questions of your investors as well. I appreciate that very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks very much for having me. Appreciate it.